Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast for June 2nd, 2022. I'm Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo.
Hey, Mark, it's your old pal Peter Ryan coming at you from Montreal, Quebec, Canada.
Great to hear that, Peter. Well, this week we've got to focus on CX recruitment, and I know that you did this interview. So why don't you introduce it initially then?
Sure thing. Mark, savvy listeners of the CX Files will remember that about 1 year ago, in fact, 1 calendar year ago, almost to this day, we had the pleasure of interviewing Annelien Marcus, who is a director with Clarion People in the United Kingdom, one of the country's leading recruitment agencies for the CX space. We thought it would be good to check back in with Annelien to find out where recruitment for customer management sits at the midpoint of 2022. And needless to say, it was, as you would expect with Annelien, an animated discussion, but one with a heck of a lot of substance and certainly some great takeaways.
Yeah, and I think that, listening to the interview, it sounded like we still haven't seen where all the cards are going to fall, based on, how much hybrid is going to continue. But I must say that, you and I both talked to most of the big BPO companies out there, and I know that the big guys for sure are rapidly integrating hybrid into their service offering. I mean, they're now considering it to be business as normal.
Yeah, and I think this is something that Annelien did touch on over the course of our chat. One thing that she did identify as a bit of a disconnect is the extent to which agents, the agent community, whether they're existing agents or prospective ones, have become accustomed to working from home and wanting to work remotely versus what the enterprises and potentially the clients of BPOs are looking for in regards to wanting the agent community to come back into the centers. And we're at a point right now, according to Annelien, where at some point there is going to need to be some compromise, because what the agents want versus what the enterprises are looking for may be two different things. But if customer management and the best possible outcomes are going to be realized, then there's going to need to be some type of a meeting in the middle.
Although, personally, I would say that it's no bad thing that the agents have a bit more agency and leverage, because let's face it, we've been talking for a long time about how valuable they are and how we are now hiring subject matter experts, not just people who can work on any account reading a script. If you're supporting Samsung consumer electronics, you can't just immediately transition over and do insurance company support. So we are talking about specialized people, and I do think that they should have some leverage in these discussions.
Without a shadow of a doubt, Mark, and I think you're right, we are talking about how the role of the agent is evolving, and Annelien was very candid in how she talked about what the enterprises and the outsourcers are looking for. And certainly that capability, that capacity to be more of a subject matter expert, more of a problem solver, more analytical is definitely coming to the forefront in the UK CX space. And this should come as no surprise. I think one thing that really stood out for me as well in our discussion was when Annelien mentioned that the good news is the pool of talent that seems to be applying for roles is getting bigger. We were talking for the longest time about the Great Resignation, but Annelien is anticipating, based on what she's seeing right now, that there's going to be a lot more flexibility in terms of the labor pool that is interested in working in the customer management space, provided, of course, that the customer management organizations are giving them that level of career path and that sense of how they can progress in their own personal journeys within the scope of the CX organization. That's going to be key to this dynamic.
Yeah, and I think that as we see even more complexity in the contact center market, it becomes a much more interesting place to be. It used to be that I suppose the only jumping off points from being an agent were really kind of moving into sales or maybe marketing. But for a lot of people, it ended up as a dead end. Obviously, you could rise within the ranks, but there's only limited supervisor roles and then limited manager roles. So you have to be lucky to get those promotions. But now, you can branch off into any area of technology, so many different areas of support, and even moving on to coding some of the automation systems. There's now a dozen different career paths that you can go to.
Exactly. And one of the things that really hits home for me these days is the fact that if you take a look at the new generation of leaders in the CX space, we could name 5 or 6 right off the top of our heads that started as agents and have moved up to become the leaders, the managing directors, the CEOs of different contact center outsourcing organizations. It's very much changing as part of a new generational pull. And I think one of the things that Annelien was alluding to in our chat was the fact that organizations that aren't yet doing those elements of career pathing need to get on board very quickly because they're coming up from behind.
Okay, that's great. So let's go to the discussion with Annelien Marcus from Clarion Recruitment.
It's been a while since the CX Files had the opportunity and the privilege of speaking with our friend Annelien Marcus, who is a director with Clarion People in the United Kingdom. In fact, Annelien, I think it's been an entire calendar year since we last caught up. Great to have you here.
Oh, thank you. Goodness me, how time flies. It's been a year already. Well, I feel much older, I can tell you that.
I do too. It's amazing. It's amazing how fast time flies and how you start seeing hair growing out of parts of your anatomy that you never anticipated. But you know,
gray hairs as well.
Yeah, please don't start on that track. This is getting off to a very, very dour tone, but the goal of the CX Files is to keep it positive. As long as you're here another year, you know what, that's what counts. You know, I always say birthdays are never something to shudder, there's something to celebrate. So really happy to have you here after 12 months since we last spoke. And obviously a lot has happened in the course of the past year. And what we're looking to do is try and get an update from you today from the United Kingdom standpoint about recruitment, because anecdotally, we're picking up a lot of different elements pointing to challenges when it comes to the recruitment of team members in the contact center, whether it's the mid-level management space, the supervisor space, right down to the front lines. So probably a good starting point, Annelien, would be to maybe get some thoughts from you over the course of the past year. What have you been picking up on in regards to some of the key recruitment trends that are impacting British contact centers and CX operations?
Oh, first and foremost, you know, the amount of jobs and candidates out there. The UK is very candidate driven. It has been for a good few months now. There is obviously last year, this time there were so many people being furloughed and being made redundant, etc. So there was loads and loads of people, but hardly any jobs, because some of the businesses are not opened yet. So now it's the other way around. People, you know, inundated with jobs every day. I mean, as a recruiter, you don't actually have to do any kind of business development so much at the minute, purely because there's so many jobs out there that people need help. And we do tend to get the more hard to fill roles as well. But yeah, the trend has definitely changed. Recruitment is never an easy gig, that's for sure. But yeah, I find it also get kicks out of it still. But yeah, it's definitely flexibility in the workplace is needed, because I would say 80% of applicants at the moment is always asking me either about a remote working or hybrid options at least.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to go back to the office full time. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing, where last year we didn't have a choice. This year it is a conscious choice for people to make, where they need to and they want to maintain that flexibility of being able to stay at home a few days a week, I think.
But that's really interesting, because I'm getting the same sense, whether it's the United Kingdom or here in North America or anywhere else in some of the key demand markets. To what extent do you find where you have the agents that are pushing to try and stay at home more often than not, or to work the majority of time from home, how receptive are your clients to this? Is this something that they're willing to play ball on, or do they want the agents coming back into the centers most of the time, if not full time?
I would say probably 90% of them want these people back in the office. As you know, contact center workers, customer service especially, very sociable people as well. They tend to thrive off of a team energy and stuff like that as well. So it is nice to be able to have a team back amongst each other, so that they can grow and learn again. So I think on the client side, they are really pushing to get people back in the office. But some people are just not ready to do it, unfortunately. And I think that's why we are in such a rut at the moment, recruiting wise, because some people are not really ready to compromise yet, and we need to find that compromise as soon as.
Yeah, and what's interesting about what you just said is that need for compromise and the ability to try and source good labor that's willing and ready to come back into a CX role, or to take one on for the first time. And interestingly enough, I recently completed a survey of enterprise CX decision makers, so potentially clients of yours. And what we found was, when we broke the data out on a country by country basis across the 8 different demand markets we looked at, in the United Kingdom, one of the top 3 pain points that captive CX operations or contact centers are facing is recruiting the right agent profile. And it sounds to me that need for flexibility to be able to accommodate the desire of an agent to do at least some home working throughout the week is going to be essential if they're going to be able to capture that level of skills and enthusiasm that's needed to drive the best CX outcomes.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And I see this all the time. I have mentioned my daughter in the past and several of my podcasts, purely because she works in the contact center environment, and I see it in her team and in her environment, and some of her friends who are also in similar jobs. And they have been unhappy. Some of them changed their jobs because they've been unhappy with the fact that there wasn't that flexibility. So I think we certainly have to look at it 100%. I think also during the pandemic, a lot of people have proved to their employers, that they can be trusted to do the job at hand at home. You don't need to sit on somebody's shoulder. So yeah, we'll just have to see. And I can understand not all jobs can be done from home. Especially if it's a new job or you bring in trainees in. For example, at the minute, I'm working with a client who need trainees in full time. And their training program is going to be at least 3 months long, so they can't work from home for at least 3 months. So hopefully by the time the 3-month period is over, then they will be settled enough and think, oh, you know what, it's not been so bad to go back to the office. I think maybe that's the client's angle as well, a little bit. And just to show people, it's actually quite nice to be back in the office. I, for one, miss it. I'm not going to lie. I miss having people around me every day.
It's understandable. I'll be honest with you. I've probably been working remotely now for, I can count it up, 16, 17 years. And to me, it's not been a big stretch, but I will say that when I had the chance to go work at a client's office, I really enjoy the buzz. I enjoy the energy. I enjoy the positivity that you get having people around. And it's understandable that I think a lot of people might want to go back and spend some time in the office. It's understandable that there are some who take a more remote-centric approach. I'd be curious if we could drill down into the roles themselves, Annelien. What are you finding are right now the most straightforward roles to fill in the CX space?
Oh, goodness, good question. Well, I can only speak from my own experience, really. At the moment, we've got loads of sales, like telesales, business development kind of roles, loads of them. They tend to, and telemarketing, talent acquisition, that's very, very huge at the minute. So customer service will always be there, obviously, as well, because we have to ensure that every business has got their journey is adhered to, and your client is as happy as possible. But from personal experience, we have more sales roles than anything else at the moment. But then again, as I say, we tend to get the harder to fill roles purely because your HR department or your talent acquisition department might not be able to do certain things. So they tend to do the entry level easier levels and the high volume things rather than to outsource it to an agency. But yeah, as I say, that's what we're experiencing at the moment.
And can you tell me a little bit about what the clients of Clarion are looking for in terms of skills? What are they expecting that agents need to be able to bring to the table in regards to the talent and really the elements that are most prized right now in the frontline CX environment?
Goodness, I would say it would always be that customer service skill, first and foremost, putting them in the forefront. Being self-managed as well, if and when, if for any reason they have to work from home, they have got that, the discipline to do so. And then, yeah, I think it's still being able to, the IT skills, obviously. I think a lot of us realized how bad our IT skills was when lockdown happened. And I was like, okay, how do I do a Zoom? I've never really done one before, that kind of thing. So I think we've learned a lot. IT skills is definitely one of them, and being able to utilize your CRM properly, being disciplined enough to complete that and work with that on a daily basis, I think is very, very important, because you have to be able to get that information across to the entire business, because you're not necessarily in the same room anymore, in the same space. So I think it's very similar to what it always was. I think it's just, let's get people in that want to be there. People want to work, it's hungry to work and earn good money.
And that's good news, because I mean, one of the things that I think the media has been bombarding us with the past year or so is the Great Resignation and the extent to which people don't want to work. But again, I am picking up anecdotally a lot of confirmation around what you've just said. There seems to be a desire in the population, now that they can't rely on COVID support benefits, that people do want to get back into the workforce, that there is a desire to get back and to be productive and to stimulate themselves. I don't think anybody wants to get to a scenario like we might have had towards the end of 2020, where we were all burning ourselves out, working 13, 14, 15-hour days, where we were waking up and just going to the computer and then staying at the computer till we went to bed. No, there's got to be a balance. But as long as there is supply out there, there's the opportunity to bring people into the center. And that leads me to my final question. As we're going into the second half of 2022, and I don't know about you, I can't believe how fast the first half has flown by. It's been like a Concorde. What do you think are going to be the key dynamics around CX recruitment in the UK? What would you say will be the pressure points, and where do the opportunities look like?
I would say going forward, things that we need to make sure is that the candidate journey needs to be improved, first and foremost. For every employer, this is honestly a shout out to any employer out there looking to retain their staff, especially because retention is so important. You've got people there that's been loyal, they know the job, they've done the training, etc. Retain them. I think that's going to be the hardest and the most important thing right now. Listen to what their complaints are and where they're complaining about. The small things, we're not talking about tea and coffee in the office and a bowl of fruit kind of thing. We're talking about maybe having some kind of days off if you are having a mental health problem. That's a very big thing. Retention, as I say, is very important. Diversity and inclusion. I go on and on and on about ageism in the workplace at the moment, and I can't understand why people don't embrace the older generation to come into an office space, really, because I am definitely certainly at this age already, one of those older generation already, come with a boundless information and experience. And I think it also, it brings innovation and creativity in if you've got that diverse workforce there. I also see the small things will change, like being flexible on your location of work, whether it's remote working. And one thing I can also say, and I think a lot of the problems that we are experiencing in the work market at the moment is the fact that there's not so many Europeans here anymore to help with our workforce and fill our workforce. They've gone home for various reasons, whether it's Brexit, whether it's COVID. they need to come back now. So we need to maybe look at doing some kind of sponsorship to get these people back into the workforce in the UK and not shy away. Don't get me wrong, I've done sponsorships before. It's a long, drawn out, complicated thing. And we need to try and simplify that. I think that will help a lot. But yeah, smoother onboarding, making sure you stick to your promises. If you say to people, I'm going to give you some training opportunities, make sure you do those things, give some good benefits. People are not just there to earn money. They are there to improve themselves as well,
This is it. And you touched on something at the outset of your comments that really resonated with me. Several months ago, I did an interview with the managing director of a contact center who had started as an agent at the agent level. And one of the things that she had highlighted was the need for contact centers, whether it's outsourced or in-house, to be able to provide a defined career path for individuals, to let them know this is not a stopgap, that this is not something that you do between your A levels and uni, or it's not something you do during your gap year. This is something you can build a career around. And there was, not long after I had the discussion, something I saw in a retail store in Canada here, and it was probably the best laid out definition about how somebody can start working at that store. And then it was almost like a decision tree, different branches. If you're enjoying doing this, you can go this direction. If you're enjoying doing that, you can go that direction. But the key thing was they were moving up the career progression. And I think this is something the CX industry is in dire need of. And I think you've outlined it very eloquently. Really appreciate your time here today, Annelien. Hopefully we will talk to you within the next 12 months, not 12 months from now. But if it is 12 months, we'll make this an annual thing.
No, hey, happy birthday.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be wonderful. But we will.
It's a good month.
Absolutely.
No,
well, cool stuff. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Annelien. Great to catch up. And the CX Files and our audience truly appreciates your insight.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.